and headed to Jalapa. We left the bus station looking for a hotel, and we found one on the same avenue. Incidentally, what caught our attention, due to its symbolic value, was that the hotel was just finishing construction, and was called La Imperatriz. She had previously recognized herself as having been identified by the card La Imperatriz, the fourth card of the tarot. The next day we went to ashram, and it began to rain heavily, although there was a popular festival in the town of Coatepec, so the grape harvest stalls along the streets put up tarps to protect themselves from the rain. It had been some time since I had been to this beloved ashram of Coatepec, where Maestro Estrada spent the night a few years after leaving his 40-month retreat. Because there I was fortunate enough to see him walk and receive his talk and blessing in the small shrine. But above all, I remember that day, when I arrived at the place with a fever, carrying one of my 2-year-old sons, while my former partner, their mother, reluctantly carried the older one, about 3, by the hand. And I was a little distressed because, in the light but icy rain, I was sweating, but only with sweat, due to the fever. And she helped me lie down, before we went to fill out our registration at the reception desk. I was tired, and almost immediately fell asleep, only to be a little delirious. But anyway, I began to have a rather vivid dream. I saw myself waiting in line with other people in a very pleasant place. The person next to me told me that we were already dead and the lords of karma, I called them by another name that I don't remember, were examining us. And that's what we were training for, to be with them. Then the scene changed, and I was talking with some confidence with them, and other spiritual masters. Some time had passed, and we were discussing my next incarnation. They tried to explain to me that it was good for me to wait a little longer, because the time wasn't very good yet, so I could enter a womb to reincarnate. But I had considered the situation, and knew I was going to meet an important spiritual brother, and had to incarnate now to reach him. Later, I learned it was really Master Estrada. Immediately, the scene changed, and I tried to wake up. But the dream I was having was complete when I had decided to enter a womb of poor people, although from the city, and my father was said to be a worker. Among the masters, dedicated to caring for the reincarnated, some were concerned that perhaps better conditions could have been found for me, due to my spiritual hierarchy. But I began to repeat over and over again, as I descended into the third-dimensional world again. I have to be born in 1959. I have to be born in 59. And so it was, for such was the year of my birth. I woke up, and was still feverish, but pleasantly surprised by the memory of how I decided to reincarnate into this current life. I settled in, and tried to sleep a little longer, because it was getting close to the time we were supposed to get up. That is, before 6 a.m. Americo Living Trail 174. In what seemed like less than an hour, the then elder of ashram came in, and made us all stand up. I thought he'd be understanding, because he'd understand I had the flu, but he didn't even notice my situation. He shouted that it was just an excuse. And he continued with his mission of training people for the new age. So I stood up, all shaky. I went to do my exercises, and then took an ice-cold bath. A little while later, he had us shoveling the earth in the back of ashram, to make compost with the organic waste from the food collected the day before. But fortunately, to my surprise, as the sun slowly rose over the horizon, around 8 or 9 in the morning, my fever was gone. And now I arrived at this ashram again, but I did so with my new companion. She prudently told me she would wait for me outside the reception area. And indeed, as soon as I entered, they recognized me, and the first thing they asked me was about the mother of my children, since the ashram's manager, elder, knew her, and upon noticing that my companion was another woman, he looked at her with some suspicion. When I left this difficult interview and the corresponding greetings, I took her to see the small sanctuary where Maestro Estrada performed his ceremony. What she loved most was the ecological wooden house, built with polygons. Since then, the contact we had with the masters intensified. When we returned to our hotel in Jalapa, it was already nighttime. We got a bit lost on a bus that was taking us to places we weren't familiar with. She became a little desperate, complaining to me and to life about the fact that she was always the one who had to decide where and when. She said to me, "It's enough that I have to signal when we'll get off. Now you figure it out. This made me serious and focused, because I always confided in her in cases like this. And about 5 minutes into the drive, when she was about to take a turn toward somewhere, I suddenly jumped out of my seat and ordered, "Here we go." We jumped out of the bus, and walked 1 block further forward, suddenly coming out onto the avenue almost right in front of our hotel. We were both amazed at the accuracy of my intuition. Once in our room, we entered into meditation and the masters began to talk to us through it. "There are many entrances around this place that lead to the center of the planet," said one of them. "Don't be afraid, because you are the Lord and Master of these lands," Master Estrada commented. And then the Tibetan spoke. Americo Living Trail 175. 175. Don't worry about the mission you must accomplish together. If the situation cannot be saved, we will avoid further suffering for humanity, which is heading for its total doom. We will get you out of here, and turn you into pacifers. When we returned with my students from the Shaya centers, I told them a little about our trip to Jalapa and the fantastic reasons that led us to go, like stopping earthquakes. She was embarrassed, because it was obvious we were staying together in Veracruz, and any students who had doubts about our relationship could rest assured now. A bigger department. We couldn't cook properly in the small room where we lived, as it didn't have windows facing the street, and we had trouble hanging our freshly washed clothes and other things. I was still teaching at the Nueva Era Center, 2000, and, as soon as a slightly larger apartment became available, one that faced the street, and had some furniture and a kitchen, we moved there. Our madness didn't improve, and every day we loved each other more. But when things got tough, and society, the only way I had to connect with the world, began to hang by a thread. I'd get a little irritable, and she, with her Aries personality, would provoke arguments, but nothing more. We practically only had each other, and we spent all our time together, given that our separation from our families became increasingly complete. So if one of us wasn't well, the whole world seemed to collapse. My discipline grew stronger, and she was a terrible meditation instructor, due to her stern way of teaching me. She had learned to meditate in Loggia, but that turned out to be child's play compared to what her instructor, the Enlightened One, taught her. She had incredible training, and her mind was very strong. Furthermore, the masters cared for her like a queen, and were careful in how they treated her, since, frankly, I was still quite unconscious, and had never dealt with a woman of such a decidedly cosmic nature. At the beginning of this training, I was bothered by the well-known warning that Master Estrada gave during his lifetime, about not meditating too much, and instead focusing on working for the GFU institution. He called excessive meditators by trade. So, full-time meditation was something that wasn't well received in the world where I had learned. And I knew that in a way he was right. But life was making me need meditation much more than usual, in order to survive, in a society where I was ceasing to exist. She must have noticed, because she made me sit up straight, and then began addressing me in a stern voice. But one day it occurred to her that we should do a bowel wash to cleanse our intestines. And when it was time to meditate, she was very serious, giving orders. But suddenly she smiled, until she couldn't contain her laughter anymore. She ran up and went Americo Living Trail 176 to the bathroom. From then on, I lost my fear of her a little, because I realized that, after all, I was also a human being. The doubts about whether all this channeling stuff was real or just a hoax never ceased to bother me. But once in my presence, she fell into a hypnotic state. At first, she seemed perfectly normal, preparing to meditate in the half-lotus position, with her feet crossed, but suddenly she lost consciousness, and I was standing in front of her body, observing everything. And she began to channel in that trance-like state. "I'm Master Estrada. We did this, so you know this is real, and besides, we don't want her to know what I'm about to tell you. This woman is a highly evolved incarnation, just like you. So, on the planet, both have their respective peoples, and if something were to happen to humanity, they could take their own. But with their reunion, it's possible to save many more. In fact, much can be saved by their union. This woman enters the sun, as if it were her home. She is the commander of a great squadron in the galaxy, that is not limited to this conglomerate, but travels even further. Respect her and take great care of her. because we have remained for you, and the Tibetan is responsible for her." When the call ended, he opened his eyes just like that. He was fully conscious, and I could see that he didn't remember anything. On the contrary, she felt like a puppet. She became very angry, and began to complain loudly about the abuse she had suffered. It shocked her that she was being used by higher beings. When she had her human outbursts, he sighed in comfort, because after all, she was also an ordinary person. Sometimes I had to go for a walk, because despite the love that surrounded me, day by day I was losing everything in the outside world. Then I would calm down and go home. She spent months healing me with acupuncture, massages, and incense therapy. It was only in those moments that I began to realize I'd never had a break in my life. For the first time in my life, someone could give me something. Someone truly loved me for who I am, because they could see me as such. I was entering into myself, as if I were being born from her own womb. And that's why it was so special that sometimes I took care of myself, like a child. And it wasn't a matter of one day, reaching a certain balance, before standing up in the rediscovering of who I truly am, in a natural and normal way. The process lasted months, and I understood myself with a love I'd never known or believed existed. One day I was so sad I couldn't get up. But she was very patient, and took care of me. I even cried, because I heard a whistle of the man's banana cart passing by on the street selling them. That reminded me of my childhood, and I began to miss it. I was crying, because I was becoming more aware of human reality. Americo Living Trail 177. When I got up on the third day, and was performing my usual disciplines, they told me, "Every time you have a crisis like that, one day means a year of karma in your life. Just because of your foolish weakness and useless nostalgia." I was worried that the masters were telling me that, if we didn't do things right, the time would soon come when people would die like animals in the street, due to the unbearable solar radiation. They would be left there like simple sacks, fallen, never to rise again. Another shocking message that made my friend cry, was when I was told that brothers from La Jifta University were having orgies in places like Peru and some other places. She could see what was happening, and it made her very sad. Then it was Master Estrada who lamented his recent useless incarnation spent for nothing. 80 years of my last life thrown away, he stated. And he continued, "Even gurus believe themselves to be gods, and some do not rise above the rank of a simple yaman." It was approximately a year later that I was living with the concern of why Master Estrada, who never, in life, spoke of UFOs or communications between his disciples and the ascended masters, had suddenly chosen us for the purpose of preparing us. However, one day the teacher seemed to feel confident enough to tell us something more personal, and he said, "When I disincarnated, as I passed through the fourth dimension, I began to cry, but really cry, because as we advance through the internal planes, the pain is more subtle, sharp, and intense. Seeing our mistakes is truly powerful. So, as I advanced through the fourth dimension, I saw my GFU and all those I had chosen with such love, and I realized what they really were. What they truly thought, and felt in general. This was worthless. They don't have the strength needed to save the world. On the contrary, this won't last long." It was a moving confidence that strengthened my confidence that I had not been mistaken in my silent personal assessments. Then, referring to the economic incapacity of you, Master Estrada Lajif stated, "The GFU are the beggars of the New Age." We subtly detected that we were beginning to live in a kind of compressed time. My current partner was showing signs that he was going to end the partnership, and in fast motion, we were trying to make decisions. For example, we were considering moving to Merida, and then returning to Mexico. Americo Living Trail 178. The teachers told us about it. It's not a good idea for them to go to the provinces, because many people there dress in white, and that doesn't do him any good. He hasn't mastered it yet. La Luna, and women who dress in white seem, subconsciously, evolved to him. And I realized this as they took the trouble to point out to me the danger of my own unconscious. Almost with terror, I began to recognize that my unconscious dominated me practically every moment of the day. When I was walking down the street, on public transport, and in restaurants, my gaze was very strong, but my mind was unconscious, especially toward any woman who was physically active. And the teacher scolded me mercilessly, hitting where it hurts. Remember that you have a square with Mercury La Luna, and this makes everything feminine in motion catch your attention. Especially because it's related to Sagittarius, whose key is IC. That's why Master de la Ferrier, referring to sophisticated women, those whom Vox Populi calls hollow, said, "There are women who, if their clothes were taken off, would have nothing left." But it wasn't all scolding. One night I was sitting at the foot of the bed trying to enter a level of meditation. She was leading, and suddenly she opened her eyes, and ordered me to lie in the lotus position on the bed next to her. She explained that Master de la Ferrier wanted to give me something. I closed my eyes, and tried to concentrate, and the message began. "Extend your hands, because you are about to receive this gift. It is the violet cape, that great masters have always worn since time immemorial, as it has been passed down from age to age, according to the needs of highly advanced initiates. This cape is not visible on the physical plane, but it is visible in the fourth dimension. When you feel the misery of the world and the loneliness, the cold and incomprehension of humanity, when you want to protect yourself in the midst of turmoil, and whenever you seek God and peace, wrap yourself in your violet cape." This was a wonderful and unexpected gift. During the night, my mind struggled with whether to accept this fantasy or not, and I fell asleep. Then, I had a dream. It was one of those dreams in which one is more or less conscious. I was wearing the cloak, and was approaching a group of women who attracted me tremendously. They, in turn, were trying to get me to go to where they were. Then, remembering my violet cloak, I wrapped it around me, and concentrated a little. The irresistible sensation, and even the presence of those women, suddenly disappeared, but when I looked at myself, I saw that I was wearing the violet cloak. At that moment I woke up perfectly remembering this dream, and I said to myself, "This purple cape definitely exists." Americo Living Trail 179 179. One morning when I opened my eyes, I was feeling restless, because I felt something was changing inside me. And they said to me, "We are changing both of their mental genetics." When I realized that I loved this woman not only physically and emotionally, but also mentally and even spiritually. They explained, "We are adjusting your bodies. You are not soulmates, but perfect complements, and therefore, there is work to be done, that you have no idea about. His absolute body, that is, his septum or seventh body, is being born, and this is the reason for so many changes in your physical environment. Furthermore, you are being united physically, emotionally, and mentally." But despite the patience of these invisible forces, I found it hard to stop thinking about erotic fantasies when I was with her, and sometimes I forgot how I should treat her, and became somewhat reckless in my attitude toward her simple person. The one who called himself the master of her La Ferrier said to me more than once, "For the gods they are the goddesses, and for the males they are the females." Another day I said to my partner, "I feel so much like, if I were to sit in the shade of a tree, I would experience right there, as I do now, that it is my home." "You're right, brother," Master Estrada explained, continuing, "Wherever you are, you're going to begin to feel that you're connected to the entire planet, because in reality, this is what's happening." Other times I was worried, because I wanted an explanation of what I was being prepared for, and the answer was, one day you're a sailor, the next day you're a captain. Then you become a chief of staff, then the head of a country's entire naval department, and so on. If I told you now that tomorrow you'd become a captain, that wouldn't be correct, because the following week you'd be a higher rank. So we can't hold you back, by saying you'll be this or that. Try to flow. Only once during the entire retreat, I received a message from the master of the Tibetan master, whom I have since called the Supreme Master. It was around this time that he did it, and each of his words was so powerful, that I used them in my daily meditations for quite some time. What the Supreme Master said was, "Americo Living Trail 180 180. You are a man ahead of your time. You don't owe anyone anything and no one owes you anything. Walk because you want to walk, serve because you want to serve, and be served, because they want to serve you. You are free, and you remain free. Humble because before the cosmos you are much smaller than an ant." Days passed, and she wanted to visit her mother in the industrial colony one day. I agreed. But it was 10 at night, and she hadn't arrived at our house. The feeling was one of enormous anguish, because I had given up everything in pursuit of a relationship based entirely on her. I saw her everywhere. I associated her with everything, the air, the people, the sun, the rain. Everything was her. My eternal feminine. I called him at home after much consideration, because I didn't want anything to interrupt this internal process he was going through. His mother answered, and I immediately connected with her. "I'm fine, don't worry. The thing is, she was referring to her husband, is out, and I don't want to see him. I'm waiting to see if he leaves. If not, I'll have to stay here." "Stay there, don't even think about it. If you do, I'll come get you there, I don't care at all," was my passionate reaction. "Please don't do that. If he finds out about all this, he's likely to try to kill you, I'm sure." "Then try to fix it, as soon as possible. I'll call you in about 2 hours, and you can tell me which subway you're at, so I can pick you up." "Alright." 2 hours later, I called her, and she told me she'd be at a specific subway station in half an hour. I went to pick her up. By the time we got home, it was already 1 in the morning, but my soul was at rest. I was already getting used to having her with me every day, every hour. It was a gift from heaven. Nothing else was left for me but her, and this made her even more important to me. In the evenings I liked to go out for a walk and we celebrated together. Our favorite place was the bakery called La Espiga. They sold a cake packaged in the shape of an ice cream cone filled with whipped cream and cherries. She also liked sweet Americo Living Trail 181 things like this. They weren't that expensive, and we happily went out to sit next to La Espiga, eating it very slowly. As my ties to society became less frequent, we had more time together. It was one of these times when we were coming from the spike when, incidentally, we came face to face with the couple who lived in one of the rooms in the old Jose Marti Hotel. She was dressed completely in black and his eyes were half closed. He was actually out of his mind. When we saw these people walking straight toward us, my companion reacted, "Come this way, ignore them and keep walking," and while saying that he pulled me by the arm, as we moved forward quickly. She later explained to me that she hadn't wanted to tell me, but ever since we moved into Jose Marti's house, she suspected that the woman had the man bound through magic, and that she felt, according to the messages from the masters, that just as we were united by white magic, a couple appeared united by black magic. My companion, who was always very vigilant to ensure nothing happened to me, took her role very seriously. So I was almost constantly aware that the masters wanted me, above all else, to take care of my physical body, since my survival in the physical body was very important, above all else. All because of the sacred mission they were preparing me for. When she went to visit her mother, she was already feeling restless, as she was beginning her husband's 6-month stay in Mexico City. And since there was a communications office for the company where he worked right next to the guest house where we lived, it was possible, and we later confirmed that this was the case, that her husband would occasionally visit that office. His job included visiting various offices. So, in addition to our entire situation, this was also the reason we started looking for another place. Only our funds were reaching their limit in a threatening manner. We walked through the Roma neighborhood, and it was incredible to discover the myriad ways of life of many people living in guest houses that, from the outside, looked like simple private homes. For example, I once left early, newspaper under my arm, to look up some addresses listed there. The owner of the place kindly invited me in. The staircase was wooden, and the steps creaked. In one corner, there was a room, or what we might call one, with approximately 20 or 30 other small rooms. Each one was rustically furnished with a sort of closet and an old bed. In the middle of this mansion, there was a row of sinks, on all 4 sides of a square, with multiple entrances for bathrooms. Americo Living Trail 182. I mentioned it to my friend, and she decided to go with me to visit him. I was distraught, and as we walked down one of these gloomy corridors, we came across a dwarf who was perched on something that served as a step, trying to reach the sink faucet, so he could wash his hands. He was a man who worked on the street all day, washing cars or doing odd jobs here and there. It was easy to see that people whose jobs were not exactly honorable must live in such places. The fact is, that the impression this experience made on my companion was evident on her face, as this dwarf seemed straight out of a science fiction story, as if immersed in real life. appearing precisely in this place that was real to all these vagabonds, spending the night in such an ancient mansion, where the law of the mighty over the weak surely prevailed among them. We were definitely not going to live in this place. A sweet moment we experienced in this apartment near La Espiga the Spike was when we still had a little money and had a day off, so we went out very early to visit all the esoteric bookstores we both remember visiting. We shared an incredible time together. When we returned home, it was already nighttime, and she was happy. But it was clear the masters were rushing, trying to get something done on the fly, right at the moment of emergency. They had chosen us, or at least it seemed that way. But unlike what was expected, they displayed an incredible calm, as if nothing worried them. This is a way of seeing life that I would learn from them, and could not forget. Someone once told my partner, at the moment of your orgasm, mentally throw your energy towards Coatepec. This made me think that things were not going well in this place. Sometimes I noticed that despite her youth, and how much she loved me, she complained that I had too much energy. But it wasn't just something that came from my physical side, but from within myself. At this ghost house, we had only been visited once by our member, another time by an acquaintance from the GFU, and yet another time by my mother and the children. But when they did, I felt I was somehow interfering with something very sacred, not because it was mine or hers, but because higher energies were present there, and a retreat is sacred. I was soon to find out this, because after the visit from the member and the supposed friend from the GFU, the children's mother managed to locate my address. Indeed, I was beginning to understand, though I wasn't yet fully aware of it, that a retreat can't allow for frequenting family, friends, and old relationships, no matter how close they may be. In other words, you can't just mix the sacred and the mundane. Americo Living Trail 183. My mother, out of desperation, had managed to contact me, and I was as moved as my partner when she found out. She wanted to know where I lived. We invited her to our special place with the children. Then we immediately decided to take my children to the movies. We went to the Las Americas Cinema to see Beauty and the Beast. That night, they went to Netzahualcoyotl's house, very happy. Something similar would happen when I was located by a GFU brother who was my friend. About 2 years earlier, he had prepared a talk for me at a university, where he had previously been a student. But now he was so eager to show me his brotherly love, and bring me back to the fold, that he came to visit me. But I didn't give it much thought. About 3 days before the weekly lease ran out, she had a dream, and told it to me. I was conscious in the dream, and because of the energy you and I wield, the people living in this ghost house were becoming desperate, because the entire house was starting to burn. Their despair was so great, that the people living upstairs didn't have the time or the ability to find a way down, so they threw themselves from the top floor into the street. The masters then told me they've done a good job here, because all the prostitution and degeneration that exists in insurgents is transmuted by their love. Actually, after 1 in the morning, we could look out the window and see our entire avenue, as if it were daytime, so crowded were it, especially prostitutes and gay men stopping and shouting at drivers trying to make a deal. The situation wasn't as vulgar as it was on Jose Marti, and yet the patrol car often had to come to threaten these people. It was because of situations like this that I felt like asking the teachers to tell us where to go next, but they never interfered with our free will. It was always her and I who made the decisions about our own lives together. 2 days passed without us being able to pay the rent, because we weren't making ends meet. And one night, we heard footsteps, and then the sliding of the double lock specially placed on the apartment's exit door. This time, the ghost house manager had locked our apartment for non-payment, and, moreover, thought we weren't there. We hadn't gone out at all that day, trying to figure out what we were going to do. I felt depressed and guilty about what was happening. She had confided in me, and I wasn't responding as I should have. So I mentally called out to the masters with all my might. And this is something I never ever do. The masters always spoke to me, because they wanted me to. I never invoke them by saying things like, "Please tell me what I need for this or that." I've always thought it impertinent to bother them. I feel the most wonderful thing is that they talk to us because they want to, and if they give us something, it's also because they want it. But trying to depend on them to solve our lives is foolish. However, there are times, Americo Living Trail 184 when the rule is broken, and this was one of those moments. Because we were locked in here, and we also had nowhere to turn. The force with which I invoked them was so sincere and strong that Master de la Ferrier spoke to me, and basically concluded by saying, "Gather all your things, and get out of here." Just like my physical father, the Master, he treated me with this harshness, but the difference in this particular case, is that the order was very definite. Then I asked myself out loud, as if addressing her, "Why are we being persecuted so much? What's going on here?" She stared at me, speechless from the shock of finding ourselves trapped inside with no way out. It was a symbol not only of being locked in this room, but of not being able to get out into the world in any way. Superhuman forces were definitely fighting through us on the battlefield itself. We could feel the roar of the battle. I told her, "Let's meditate." She went and sat on the bed, and I sat at the foot of it, facing her. 2 or even 3 hours passed. I was mad with the need to instantly develop the power of precipitation. For months I had been thinking that, in order to fulfill my mission, I needed to have supernormal powers, since only such a being can survive alone in the world. So right now, while I was meditating, I began to visualize gold coins appearing before me. But nothing happened. However, a light shed in my mind in a way that would be definitive from then on. An inner barrier was broken, and I entered another state of consciousness, so I realized that from then on I would meditate much more, until I discovered what was happening to humanity, and why strange forces were always trying to keep me asleep, and prevent me from awakening to the happiness that every human being deserves, as children of God, just by being alive. I decided to meditate above all else, no matter what was happening in my external life. And meditation included the usual disciplines and my ability to be happy in my own world. It wasn't just meditating crudely. When I stopped meditating, my companion was calm. The crisis had been more or less overcome, and she told me that she saw me as one of those beings who had meditated a lot, like someone who had found light towards Los Alamos. Americo Living Trail 185. The next day, morning passed, and we were in a state of questioning. But around noon, we heard footsteps approaching our door and the sound of the bolt being drawn. Then they moved away. It was again the guest house manager who had unlocked the room. I couldn't explain it. Perhaps he thought he would watch for our arrival during the day, and didn't want any trouble or friction with us. When he found out he had locked our room, I didn't know where to turn, but I told her we had to go outside to figure out what to do. We were careful to slip away, so the manager wouldn't catch us as we walked past the reception office, and when we were outside, I noticed she was desperate. I asked her what she thought, and she said, on the verge of tears, "I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know anything anymore." I didn't like this, but at the same time, she was giving me the full opportunity to decide for myself. Since it was usually her authority that directed me, backed completely and absolutely by the love of the teachers who loved her too much, in my opinion, and who always treated me harshly. So I told her, "I'll call my brother, who lives with his partner. I hope he'll be discreet, so he doesn't tell anyone where we are, since I don't want any trouble with my family or gossip about what's happening with the children. I also don't want the people at the GFU to know where I am, since the children's mother has been giving me trouble all over the place." My partner's face lit up, and she immediately returned positively to the charge. "Okay, let's get our things together, and talk to your brother." So I did, and to my surprise, my brother responded very kindly. When I told him about my situation, he immediately agreed to let me take my things to his house. He never complained about the children, or dared to ask me for a detailed explanation, even though he definitely didn't agree with me leaving them. The first part was already taken care of. All that was left was to settle the bill at the guest house, so they would let us move our things without any problems. And then she had the idea of speaking to her brother, who was living at her parents' house. She told him about a difficult situation. He scraped together his meager savings, which amounted to 600 pesos, enough to cover our stay there. But all that was left was to transport our things to my brother's house. It wasn't far, but it was money. I managed to get a little more money. It appeared unexpectedly. For example, while I was at the entrance to the Oro Center, a friend of mine, Jagnian, an undergraduate called an aspirant or sympathizer, from the GFU, happened to be leaving the place, after collecting his humble income from selling bread. I had taught him the business, and supported him a lot, when he needed it, even selling him a bread oven at a very reasonable price. So that gave me more confidence, to ask him for money. Although this friend didn't have much money, he offered me 50 pesos, no questions asked. Americo Living Trail 186. My faithful companion was waiting for me on the corner, and was happy to know that we already had transportation. But when we arrived at the Ghost House, all smiles, to finalize the settlement, we settled the matter, and planned to spend our last night there, as the shuttle would arrive tomorrow at noon. But as we were leaving, the manager who assisted us remembered something important, and made me return. "Here, they left you a message from so-and-so, she says it's very urgent, and she agreed to come back later, because she needs to speak with you personally." It was the mother of my children, who had given her my address. The only obvious suspect was the friend of La GFU's I let into this place, or perhaps my partner. But my partner didn't know, or have any contact with my ex-partner. Although I later learned that my ex-partner had finally met and interacted with my partner in person, and that he was pleasantly impressed by her, of course, I didn't know exactly to what extent. Days later, my innocent and nosy friend left me a note in a place I still frequented, where he very romantically clarified that he took part in the matter out of love for the pain of that mother, a sister of the GFU. He was referring to my ex-partner, trusting that I, being so intelligent and evolved, would return her children to her. This really made me nervous, because I absolutely didn't want to discuss the issue of the children with my ex, who was at a fever pitch at that moment. I was determined not to leave them with her, and I was also aware that she wouldn't be able to understand his inability to be a mother, given his frivolous approach to parenthood. Without much explanation, it was clear that the situation with my partner was over. In the few months, he would meet a gringo to become his partner in a product, a powdered milk substitute, which, by the way, was very good. He bought many packages of it, I think more than a ton, certain it would sell. But I suspected the government wouldn't be interested in something like this, because it would hinder its own commercial interests. And that's why my partner's legal procedures to sell it wholesale became complicated, and he had to store it, unable to negotiate on a large scale, as he had imagined. Also, reminiscing a bit about the Nueva Era 2000 Center. It wasn't well designed, as the bathrooms were located on the side of the conference space, mostly constructed with false walls made of very thin material. Because of this, my mother once told me it wasn't possible to go into the bathroom and have any privacy, and that was the case. Incidentally, my mother, who tried to learn astrology with my gold group, did so in secret, because I told her I didn't want to be treated differently if they knew she was my mother. But when that group disbanded, she didn't see me again for several years. However, she continued taking yoga, cooking, and other classes in the center of Tabasco. According to what she told me, when I saw her again after my retreat the last time I went to the Nueva Era 2000 Center, to my surprise, I ran into my young follower Yaman, the one who a few years ago helped me wash my newborn son's diapers. I don't know where he came from. He was a stalwart, but when I saw him this time, his gaze, Americo Living Trail 187 was somewhat absent. He seemed desperate, and I missed him. I would have liked to talk to him to cheer him up, but there wasn't time. Although I did find out he still worked in the large market where vegetables, greens, and other produce from farmers from various parts of the country arrived for resale at grocery stores and shopping malls in Mexico City. That place is known as the Central de Abastos. The worrying thing, I realized, was that there was an obstructive force, and we had to leave our apartment as soon as possible. Well, as I said, several people already knew where we lived, and that wasn't convenient for us, considering the increasingly esoteric work that, although I didn't fully understand it, had already begun. But I kept within me, without even intending to, the memory of those happy moments that, for a few months now, had remained present and were simple. Several times during that time, she and I would walk from the area surrounding the La Espiga bakery to the Shayamichan Oro Center. And along the way, step by step, we would enjoy that walk along Insurgents Avenue with its large windows, shops, and restaurants. And that happens with lovers. Everything was magical and congruent in many ways, despite the circumstances never being as clear as we would have liked. It was the time when the masters instilled confidence in us, and told me that one day she and I would be ready to have mutual telepathic communication. So, while she would be at my lectures among the people, she would help me with my presentations, while I gave those public talks. But instead, I realized that life was pulling us towards another destination. And the problem wasn't that my partner had never wanted to adhere to the guidelines of an institution like the GFU Solar Line. On the contrary, she truly wanted to, but she really didn't fit into this institution, due to its natural and original design. Something I would only understand more clearly after years. And there was an example of how much she wanted to be part of these people, and I want to mention it. It was the time when, without consulting me, she went to Shea Center in El Oro, and introduced herself as my partner to Shea Mitchin himself. He already knew at that time that I had a new partner, and was pleased to meet her. So he took her to his private room upstairs, which everyone called the penthouse, where Shea lived. There, she was giving him therapy, but suddenly, he wanted to seduce her. Then the maid came in, and my partner had time to leave. But that was Shea Mitchin, or at least that was the stage he was going through. Because I remember the time he desperately sought me out, asking me to draw a horoscope chart for a young girl who had already arrived with her belongings, to live with him in the penthouse, swearing that this was her destiny. I drew the chart, and went to interpret it for him. While he waited for me to give him hope, and assure him that she was the princess of his dreams, I told him, instead, that this girl didn't have Earth planets, that he should leave her alone, and that it was better for him to abandon that kind of behavior, and pursue a serious relationship instead of letting his emotions get the better of him, toward one teenager or another. He stood there like a scolded child as I left his house in the Oro Center. But his expression was clearly, "How right you are, brother." Americo Living Trail 188 Female Incognita. Anyway, my new partner had also been to talks and conferences I gave at the Oro, and she was worried when she heard me comment that one of my friends or attendees had spoken positively about her, knowing that she was with me. So she was interested in how people saw her. But the truth is, deep down, neither she nor I were perceived in the right way. Somehow, our destiny was moving us towards something more, with a spirituality that was too revolutionary, at least for the time being. It was under this context that the end of our residence and way of life in this place came to an end. There was no more Shea Mitchin, no more partner, no more mother, no more children. And no more friends, no more my beloved institution of universal brotherhood. And the ever-attentive masters, however, did sense my human weakness, and did not leave me alone. From what they spoke to me, referring to my fear of having the clash with my former partner. Don't make an elephant out of an ant. Sort your affairs out, and move on with your life, and if you run into her, tell her, "I don't want to talk to you, so you better move away, so I don't hurt you." But would my new companion stay with me permanently? Something inside me told me yes, because we're eternal, but the mortal part of me told me that nothing lasts forever, because life is like a river with twists and turns. And this double feeling was rekindled from the day she, as if foreseeing the future, was sitting on her bed one afternoon, very thoughtful and nostalgic. Suddenly, she pointed out to me, from our apartment toward the corner of the street, a large billboard that could be seen from our window, in our largest apartment. And she said, "Never forget that ad." It was the famous rabbit drinking chocolate. But when our eyes met, I was a little surprised, because I could read in her glimpse that she still had things to resolve in this life, and on her individual path. She needed to fulfill her dream of money and material comfort, because beauty is both inside and out. And, like me, she was trying to resolve the enigma of whether we belonged to our soulmate at the end of our long journey of incarnations, or if this included our actual commitment to the masculine collective, if we are women, and to the feminine collective, if we are men. Certainly have to admit that the woman is a mystery. Although, without a doubt, at this point in my life, she was unconditional and total, not only as a sweet lover, but also as an invaluable friend. to the point where each of us exercises powerful self-control and carries on as if nothing negative were happening. Americo Living Trail 189. However, I could understand her deep doubts, which were also mine regarding our respective soulmates. And this is what makes me reflect on what this woman thought and felt about people. I remember we had walked several times through the south of the city, where the homes and offices of millionaires associated with the government are located. And once she shared with me a restaurant for macrobiotic mystics, which she had known about some time ago. There I was impressed by the faces of young people who ate almost entirely seeds and special, nutritionally balanced juices. That's why their skin was so clear, and, I might say, radiant. And when, on that occasion, I looked for chairs to sit on, all I found was a long, short table with meditation stools on a carpet at its foot, on which one sat, almost on one's own calves. We faced the short-legged table, and together with the others, we could enjoy our meager, but delicious, meal. And another day, also walking along Insurgents South Avenue, she suddenly became thoughtful, in one of those states of reflection I'd come to know her by now, where she'd think to herself, while simultaneously communicating something to me. This time too, her attitude was simultaneously annoyed and rebellious. It's only fair that we have money, because it's not right to be ignored and forced into poverty. But he expressed it in the conviction that this was the right thing, and because it was a fact that the spiritual and the material are congruent in a life that is human and cosmic at the same time. Anyway, back to our last few days at the place near La Espiga. It turns out that after the message the ghost house manager gave me, it was no longer possible for us to stay the night there as we had planned. We were counting on the surplus money we had raised, and since we didn't want to call my brother again, to tell him I would be staying at his house that same afternoon, we decided to spend the night in the hotel on Lázaro Cárdenas Avenue, formerly known as Lost Boy, very close to our new place of residence in the Los Alamos neighborhood. We enjoyed being together that night because, as I said, my partner hadn't lost even a little faith in me, and what we were doing. This gave me a huge boost, and we both needed it. The next day we said goodbye to our apartment, and moved our few belongings to my brother and his partner's house. Beginning for us, another rhythm of life. In the Alamos colony, we were now living on Esparta Street. In the mornings, my brother and sister-in-law would go to work, so we would get up rhythmically, and do our yoga practice, a little Americo Living Trail 190 meditation, and then go for a walk to Alamos Park, which was about 4 blocks from this house, located parallel to Viaducto and almost reaching Lázaro Cárdenas Avenue. We spent some days enjoying our now eternal vacation, but as we caught our breath, we realized we needed to regain our privacy, because despite my brother's discretion, this couldn't last long. So we started buying the newspaper, so she could try to find some work, since I had recently tried with my father, without success. But the teachers continued with their teaching. So one morning my classmate took a marker, and wrote something about mental spheres on the blackboard in my brother's house, while saying to me, there are human beings with mental spheres and others without mental spheres. Since I didn't understand anything about this topic, she explained to me that it was something she already knew, but now the masters wanted her to share it with me. And that's why she had to give me this class. As she explained it to me in a simple way, she said, mental spheres are placed by beings of light in every human being before they are born. That's how I learned that day about the existence of human beings with mental spheres and human beings without. The former were awake, the latter asleep. Perhaps I had read something about it in Tibetan books. But they wanted me to be very aware of these facts. It was an invisible master called Arkan who specified in this regard. These teachings about human beings without mental spheres, or with mental spheres, were secret knowledge given to Hitler, and he misused it so inappropriately that it drove him insane. Then, they moved on to another topic, and mentioned that phrase of Jesus Christ when he said, "Love your fellow man as yourself." He meant that our fellow human beings are beings who have mental spheres, one of the masters commented, and continued, and those who lack mental spheres must learn to serve instead of trying to imitate everything. It is loving obedience that best protects them from their own ignorance, and allows them to develop their mental spheres. What was most urgent for them was that I stay away from humanity, so that I could develop a perspective of who's who. In this regard, Master Estrada told me, "We intend to keep you separate from the rest of the people because La Medusa, according to mythology, she petrifies all who look into her eyes. She's a vermin that exists." Americo Living Trail 191 in the real world. And as soon as you met her, she was already waiting to exterminate you, and turn you into stone. But now you're developing the power, so that she can no longer harm you. Another time, I was told about the flesh and lust. Specifically, it's not enough to be vegetarian, and not eat meat. True, not eating meat means being free from all lust. It's pointless to have a vegetarian diet, if our senses are enslaved to eating human flesh through uncontrolled sexuality. Many people work all week, so that when they get their paychecks they can go off, and indulge their animal instincts, and that's how they spend their entire lives. My dreams of becoming a guru, and being recognized and applauded by people were still alive. Because in a very veiled way, ego was corroding my blood, and I was deeply worried that I was losing the chance to receive the guru cross from the masters of the university. Then the masters spoke about it. At some point, you're going to be burdened with such a heavy burden that you'll lose your temper. For now, all you have to do is prepare yourself, and forget about all that nonsense. Also, at other times, I grew angry, because Master Estrada hadn't acknowledged the fundamental orders given to him by Master de la Ferrier. For example, when Master Estrada said in one of his written teachings, that the true Christ was represented, or rather, incarnated, by Master de la Ferrier at the age of 33. But after visiting India and Tibet, when he returned to the West to complete his mission, he was already more human, and, in some ways, no longer represented the Christ state. Then, Master de la Ferrier spoke to me about it, and referring to the confusion that Master Estrada had at that time, he said to me, "When we're too close to the light, there comes a time, when we can't see anything anymore and everything becomes confusing. Try to make sure this never happens to you." But this didn't mean he didn't recognize the good things about Master Estrada. In fact, I couldn't repay the three Satgurus, Tibetan, de la Ferrier, and Estrada, for choosing me for apostolic succession and direct teaching, transmitted from master to disciple. When the communications through my companion began, she had told me that the three masters, after examining my soul, and choosing me for the delicate mission, had to ask me if I agreed to it. To respect my free will, they had to ask me if I agreed. After some thought, of course, all this was happening on the inner planes, and I wasn't aware of it in the third dimension. I told them I accepted only on the condition that I be given a real woman to be my companion on the journey. And they agreed. But when my partner found out about the affair, she also had the condition that she be given enough money to live comfortably and with dignity. They also agreed to this. Americo Living Trail 192. The master had clarified to me that my direct master was Estrada. He then recommended that I act as himself, the master of La Ferrier, who, instead of trying to find many disciples, placed his direct succession in Estrada. He added, "It's enough to find at least one direct disciple to be the successor. And then, we can ensure the preservation of La Sagrada Tradición Initiaticism." What the master wanted, was for me to free myself from the obsession of being followed by so many people. In this regard, Master Estrada once told me that he was tired of my vanity. "Stop longing for pieces of me to become your followers. Be happy." But other times this elder brother was very tender and kind, asking me to help them in what they were engaged in, and he would tell me, "Brother, we are a team, and she and you are included. But what you must never forget, is to follow the Christ of the New Age." You know who I mean, of course. I was talking about Master de la Ferrier. He is everything, and when you contemplate his life in the Akashic records, you will realize that no human with a physical body can endure what that man experienced. What I mean is, follow Christ and nothing else. Later he clarified the difference between him as Estrada, and of La Ferrier. He did make contact with the center of our galaxy, and I only with our solar center. After a month of idle, spending my time with my partner watching television, and using the house, as if we were the owners, since the real owners only arrived at night. My partner found a job at the Vips restaurant chain. She met the requirements, and was accepted into an office near the Zapata metro station, working on a computer. Her boss was unbearable, she made her life miserable. She was afraid she would take her job. But my partner, in an almost heroic act, once again showed me what she was willing to do for me and our mission, accepting the humanly unbearable working conditions because, based on what she told me, her boss was truly crazy. So our routine began to change. Every morning I rushed to drop her off at the bus. I returned to meditate, or cast a horoscope, so I could record it. It was around that time I wanted to do her brother's birth chart, to try to make up for his altruistic act, when he gave us his savings to help us. When she left in the morning, I almost always walked a few blocks, to get my mind off things, until I reached a Llamas Park, thinking about everything that was happening in my life. This was the same park where they rented bikes when I was a kid, and I was able to finish learning how to ride there. In the afternoon, around 7:30 p.m., I arrived at the intersection of Viaducto and Isabella Católica. And there I stayed, waiting for my colleague to get off the bus. The reason I didn't go to her work was as a precaution, to avoid running into anyone I knew. And also Americo Living Trail 193 because I didn't have money for transportation. About 2 months went by like this, until my birthday arrived in December, the consecration of the 33 years. When I was about to turn 33, the masters recommended we go to a sacred place. The most suitable place would be El Tepostico. There were only about 2 days left, and that morning we were meditating in my brother's apartment. She was given the scepter of power, for which she was taken to our son, in a body higher than the physical one, to be given to her there. My companion was describing all of this to me verbally. I deduced that this was very important, because she immediately explained to me that with this scepter she would consecrate me on my birthday, when we ascended the sacred mountain of Tepostico. The day before our departure, she took me to her luxury stylist, someone who had cut the hair of several artists. As soon as I arrived, one of the assistants at the salon washed my hair in a special sink, and then this famous person styled it. On the way back, we packed our things, and, anticipating any unforeseen events, decided to arrive a day early for my birthday. We left without incident, filled with curiosity about what awaited us there. When we got off the bus, it was already 11 at night, and since we couldn't find a place to stay, we decided to go to the Shayamichan Naturist Hotel, also located in Tepoztlan. It was a delicate decision, being very aware that no one I knew should know where I was, especially at the time of my 33rd birthday consecration. I evidently associated this number with the fact that it was a sacred number for Freemasonry, just as it had to do with the final consecration of Jesus Christ, who, we know, lived to the age of 33. But as we walked into the reception area of Shaya's hotel, I saw the doctor who had replaced me as director of the naturism school approaching in the distance. Suddenly, like in a thriller, the encounter seemed inevitable. Suddenly, something distracted him, and he headed toward the pool. This way, we managed to slip away without having to explain ourselves to that doctor. However, when we spoke to the hotel manager, she gave us the bad news: there weren't any vacancies. So we went back out onto the dark street, and walked a bit, until we happened to run into a local, a countryman. I asked him if he knew where a hotel was nearby. He stared at us, and I don't know what kind of distress he saw on our faces, because he immediately realized we had nowhere to stay, and it was almost midnight. And as if to calm us down, he said, "Yes, there is one La Posada of such Americo Living Trail 194. Realizing that we were unfamiliar with the place, he offered to personally take us to the owner of the inn, whom he knew. We walked in, and the countryman personally took care of us. From a